Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor. We have a return guest with us today, Michael Klinkner, and I'm so happy to have him back. Michael is a licensed clinical social worker with over 22 years of experience helping children, adolescents, and adults in therapy. Michael has specialty training in cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and neuro-linguistic programming. Currently, Michael is working with Evolve Counseling in Arizona, where he treats a variety of issues such as anxiety, depression, trauma, and ADHD, focusing primarily on children and adolescent populations. In addition to outpatient services, Michael teaches graduate level courses for the School of Social Work at Arizona State University. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Graham, thank you so much for having me back.
Great to have you back. You know, in our first show together, we had a chance to talk about adolescent mental wellness. And today we're talking about encouraging parent and adolescent communication. And I think my goal for today's show, Michael, around it kind of being our clinician series, where we want to take our listeners kind of behind the therapy door, if you will, to show them what these sessions can look like. So I would really like it, our focus to be, as we talked earlier, to work to equip parents out there, as well as those that, engage with adolescents, on how to enhance their communication with this population of young people. And as we get started today, maybe what you could do is just kind of set the groundwork for what are some of the common challenges to our adolescents these days, and what are they going through?
The thing we see the most is perceived pressure on teens, especially around school and sports, where there are these incredibly high expectations, and the teens feel as if they can't do anything but be perfect. And so B's aren't okay, and losing a game isn't okay. Instead of, I'm always pushing for parents to emphasize effort over outcome. We've all had those teachers, we've all had those bosses that just don't like us. And no matter what you do, you're not going to get it right. But so we control what we can control. You can always control your effort, and you can always control your attitude while giving that effort. And so I tell parents all the time, a kid that scrapes together a B- in algebra 2 because they don't do math well, that's such a more important and better grade than an easy A in social studies, because they do that so well. And so there's so much anxiety and perfectionism that ends up coming from all these too high expectations and all this pressure we see, just especially on teens.
So this idea about effort, I love that. Effort over outcome goals. We can control effort. We can't always control the outcome. There's a lot of factors and variables that can thwart, our outcomes, but we can control the effort. If you encourage effort, how do you see that being the best carryover for someone's life in later years versus always having to work for the outcome goals?
Absolutely. So Graham, that helps create what the term is called grit. And so grit is that ability to do things when they're hard. And so whenever there's a big project or a big assignment, or even big tasks for later in life, when it feels and seems like a really uphill battle, can you do it? Do you got it? And so grit comes very simply from failing. And so when you've tried something and you haven't pulled it off, even sometimes fail miserably, then that's the big learning lessons, right? It's whenever I tried something, I didn't pull it off, I couldn't do it, I get to then look at why and what do I do differently next time. And so as we're emphasizing that effort versus outcome, if I'm trying really hard and I study for hours for a test and I still fail that test, I've learned something. How do I bounce back? What do I do differently next time to make me a better student and to try harder? Or in a sport, I love team sports for this, where you can nail it. You can do great in your part, but your teammate's going to let you down and you're going to lose games. Or sometimes the other team is just playing better than you are. Got it. You get to learn from that. You get to know that you did your best, but it still wasn't good enough. Great. Now what do you do next time? That really helps build that character of grit, which plays out very well for, that's the rest of your life.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like this idea. You're suggesting that in an effort-based focus, we're either winning or we're learning. It's one of those two. It's safe. We're not getting that grade. We're not hitting that, field goal. We're doing whatever. Okay. But did you learn something from it? Is there some takeaway? And that effort and that focus allows that grit to be focused. Let me nudge us a wee bit. Let's talk about those parents and the perceived pressure that we can put on them. what is underlying sometimes that pressure that parents are knowingly, unknowingly, unconsciously kind of pushing? What's driving that pressure? Do you learn?
I think lots of times it's whenever parents personalize their
Mhm.
kids' successes as their own. And so, like, when my kid does well, it's a reflection on me. But if my kid fails, it's a reflection on me. And so parents
Right.
get so worried about, like, what are the other parents going to think? What are the other parents going to say? How am I going to look if my kid is the
Right.
slowest kid on the cross country team?
Yeah.
Or the kid riding the end of the bench in basketball. For
Yeah.
parents, then they take that personally, like somehow that has something to do with them. My daughter is one of my daughters is a highly competitive cheerleader, and so she's a base, and so her flyer. This happens all the time. We watch it all the time. She has one of those moms that sits through every practice all the time, and so whenever like my daughter is trying to like pick her up and balance her,
Right.
that flyer is up looking at her mom to see if she's doing it right. So
Mm.
and so she falls all the time because she's staring at her mom who's up on the balcony watching her do it. And so there's all this pressure like, Mom, am I doing it right? And the answer's going to be no, because you're not tight and you're not concentrating. And
Yeah.
it's all cause like that mom very much she does this classically. It's the if my daughter's not doing well, that says something about me. I mean, it's also, cheer moms are famous for this stuff, but
Yeah.
it's that whole idea that I'm going to look to you, not concentrate at the task, because I'm just trying to make you happy by
Yeah.
by achieving the stuff that you think I need to achieve.
It's really a good thing you're talking about. You started out by saying, I was saying, what are some of the common challenges? And you said the perceived pressure around academics and sports. I'm sure other things too, but academics and sports. But it's really the perceived pressure that parents are putting on themselves by personalizing things. And this trickles down into the child not having a free and safe environment with which to explore, learn, fail, and then learn some more and be successful along the way. So it's really that perceived pressure being passed down, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, absolutely, Graham. That's right on, because then it's that idea of also what is going to happen then. So even when I achieve something,
Yeah.
it's still never enough because now I need to do it again and do it again and do it again. And so there's no victories. It's just like, okay, I did it good enough this time. Now I get to wait for next time.
Yeah, that's where I found some kids too getting a little afraid and a little gun shy. They'll go out and they'll have a good game, they'll go out and have a good, a good cheer session, or they'll go out and get a good grade and success in whatever way. But then they kind of clinch up. They get afraid of, can I do that again? Can I repeat that? And I saw the joy and happiness and the eyes and the response of those that were pleased with me. I guess I got the approval, but I got a little afraid. I kind of maybe don't take that shot next time, or maybe I don't take that. That I don't put in quite that effort because I'm afraid. What if I put that same effort in, and what if I keep trying, but I'm not quite as successful next time? Are you going to be approving of me, or are you going to be disappointed? So rather than face that disappointment, I kind of preemptively kind of sandbag myself.
Absolutely. We'll see this on like test taking all the time
Yeah.
too, where the
Yeah.
kid will know the information. They'll
Right.
get all this anxiety, and just like you said, they'll clench up, and so it does it, and so they'll retake the test or they get, like do it again, and they have all of those answers. They
Absolutely.
just can't pull it off in the moment because they get themselves so like they walked into that room knowing
Right.
the information, the test is in
Yeah.
front of them, they choke up, which is the last thing they need.
Yeah. And so it goes back to your emphasis of, if the parents can depersonalize their children's experiences and their endeavors and just let that be theirs. Let it be theirs. We as parents, we've had ours. We had our education, we had our sports, we had whatever we were doing. Let it be theirs and just provide that safe environment. So it's either they're winning or learning. And there's some great, ideally conversations and bonding taking place. Speaking of conversations, again, what we're trying to kind of whittle down into here, we know that about 22% of our young people, ages 13 to 18, are going to have some kind of mental health issue every year. And one of the things I know in your work that you encourage is what we refer to as open dialogue. And we kind of use
Mhm.
that phrase, in the way that we use it. But what does open dialogue mean in your mind and in your work? And what are some of the relational underpinnings necessary for this to occur?
Well, there has to be solid attachment to begin with. And
Yeah,
so it's
good.
that there's a basic relationship in place between the parent and their kid or teen. And so it's the can we have tough conversations? Can we as the teen, can I go to you and talk about, hey, I'm really struggling with my anxiety, or even like the hey, I'm at a party, my ride is drunk. I got drunk. Can you come get me?
Yeah.
Those sort of things. I mean, like, yeah, absolutely. And you're not in trouble. In fact, great job. Everyone's going to get home safe tonight because you were able to call me and know that I wasn't going to lose my mind because you got drunk.
So Michael,
Or
that just real quick around that. So
yeah,
that attachment you're suggesting is, I don't care what the situation is, and I don't care what your predicament is. You and I are okay. You and I are going to be okay. So take me up on the assuredness that this attachment, this belonging that we have is solid.
yeah, absolutely. And so it's also the idea that a kid could say to their parents, like, hey, you're putting a lot of pressure on me.
Right.
And it's making it hard to take the tests. Or when you're at every one of my practices for the whole time, I can't concentrate on what I'm doing. It's that ability for then that open dialogue is from the kid to the parent to be able to say those tough things that'll be tough for a parent to hear, but they'll take it and they'll take it in. They'll validate that kid's experience. They'll validate that kid's emotions, and they'll be able to adjust their behavior. That'll then make a huge difference in the future. So they'll continue to come to you with tough stuff.
So what are successful parents doing? Maybe things like the time spent, or maybe routines, or maybe conveying family values, maybe their own self-reflection. What are some of the things that parents are doing that allow this attachment, which ideally best starts early, but doesn't mean that it can't happen later on? We can always hit a restart and let's pick up from here. But what are some of the things that parents are doing that allow that attachment to be formed in a solid way?
Well, you as the parent have to create the time and space for those conversations to happen. And so I feel like a broken record with this stuff. I encourage parents 5 or 10 minutes every day where you're just plopping down next to your kid. They're probably in their room. So you're just going to be there. And it might be that you're both just on your phones next to each other, or you're just checking in like, hey, best part of your day, worst part of your day. Here's the best part of my day. Here's the worst part of my day. Also, I tell parents all the time, date your kids. Take them out once a month, go do something that they want to do, and just be there together. And so car rides are amazing times for conversation because there's no expected awkward eye contact. You can have the radio on, so there's not silence. And if you're running around and doing stuff together, you can be having one of these tougher conversations. It'll break up as you run into Target, go do a little bit of shopping, and then come back and you can rejoin that conversation. That gives that time and space where if they have something to say, that there's a place to do it. And now you fostered this relationship where, hey, I'm here, and sometimes we're gonna have an idiot time and laugh really hard as we're running around to Target and doing that stuff. Or sometimes we're going to talk about your friend who you just told me is cutting. And so that we can talk about that stuff too. And the conversations go all over the place, but those are never also hey, did you do your homework? Or you got to clean up your room. If for those dedicated and intentional times, you're just there with your kid, for your kid. You're not complaining and running your own agenda.
That's so good, man. I like this idea of having time that is both quantity and quality. This idea that there's a knownness that comes from those times, and our kids want to be known. What about this idea, though, for parents? And this is sometimes a challenging thing that I run into in my practice is parents will kind of, in many ways, say, it's hard for me to give what I never got. It's hard for me to be able to show up in ways that I'm kind of clunky, I'm kind of uncomfortable. I'm a little embarrassed. How do you have those talks? How do you kind of gently nudge and maybe even challenge parents to say, hey, let's come into these times? What do you do?
They have a frame of reference somewhere for what they're trying to pull off. And so lots of times I'll refer to, parents who work, I'll be like, okay, tell me about, you manage 20 people. Right. How do you have those tough conversations with one of your employees? How do you bring it up? How do you sit down? How do you get through that awkwardness? Because no one ever taught you there either, but you picked it up somewhere. How do we translate that skill set to talking with your kids? They know it's somewhere. They get so worked up, and there's so much context to it, and there's so much emotion to it, usually different than work, that's what's getting in the way. And so then it's also this perceived awkwardness that it's going to go badly, or the kid isn't going to talk. So they chicken out because they don't want to go well. That's the sex talk. It's,
Yeah, right.
the birds and the bees talk where everybody just avoids, because
Right.
if you did have one, it was so awkward with your parents, but
Yeah.
they're so necessary. And you don't have one, you have 512 of them.
Exactly. You don't have just one. You have 512 of them because you do. And that's what gets to be done. I like this idea too of if you're successful in one area, let's say work and managing people or things with your colleagues, why not generalize? If you're successful in one area, you can generalize that to another area.
Yep.
And the idea we can bring this in just real quick too, I want to tag onto that, but what would teens like parents to know about their willingness to talk if the parent would just come in and ask a question or two?
That they desperately want it. They want that connection. They want those times. They want their parents to ask. So we'll
Yes.
see lots of acting up and attention seeking behaviors
Very
just
good.
so their parents will pay attention to them, where that's
Yeah.
the whole goal is just like, if I don't get in trouble, I don't ever hear from you. And if
Right.
I'm passing all my classes, I don't ever hear a word from you. Or
Yeah.
like the parents that will like, on the like the school app that has all their grades and assignments, parents will scroll past, the five
Yeah.
A's that the kid has and be like, hey, what's up with your C? And
Yeah.
kids want to hear like, hey, tell me what I'm doing well and not just when I'm messing up.
Yeah.
And talk to me about the hard things. They really want that, because if not, the only people they have is their peers.
Oh, yeah.
And good luck with how those conversations go.
Yeah. You're talking about acting up, and this is a key piece for parents right here listening and those that work with teens. If they're acting up, more times than not, there's a need being expressed. We can work things out in one of three ways, can't we? We can act it out, we can think it out, we can talk it out. And a lot of
Mhm.
times teens not having the ability to kind of talk it out yet, they think it out, they ruminate, they obsess about it, or they act it out. It comes out sideways, and it's so easy to kind of judge and be punitive and punish that acting out. But if we can just say, hey, what's this behavior about? That's what you're encouraging here. This might be about something. What's going on? Help me understand what's underneath this possibly, and help them learn to bring it to a conversation level. Much what you're saying is teens just want to find a way to talk. And sometimes the act their best entree into, I don't know how to bring this up. Can you please bring it up?
Yeah, it's all behavior is communication, and so it's
Yeah,
never about the behavior. It's what are they
very good.
communicating with that behavior. And so as parents, it's our job to look at what's underneath and
Yeah,
get to and talk about what they're saying with what they're doing,
yeah,
versus just getting caught up in trying to like punishments and consequences and things like that. Every time I get a parent who like it's an intake and they'll say like, well, they just need like someone else to talk to. They just need like a third person they can express themselves to. And it's like, oh, no, 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 no. That's not at all. That lets me know
right.
your relationship's off. And actually you're going to be doing most of the work here, parent, because that I shouldn't be the person they're going to with all their stuff. It's supposed to be you.
Yeah, that's so good. We're talking about different ways and kind of routines that we can build in. I think car rides are awesome. I used to love taking my kids to school. One of my worst days was when my son got his license. I couldn't drive him to high school anymore,
Mm.
because I love those rides in the car. We just talked and whatever it may be and laughed. Sometimes we didn't just listen to music, but you have those 99 car rides and then you have that 100th one that says, hey, Dad, can I talk to you about something? And that
Yep.
wouldn't have happened unless those prior 99 are there. But these routines, car rides, whatever. There's also a routine around dinner. I did some research around this coming into today's talk, and I'm curious about your thought on this. Only about 30% of families manage to eat together regularly, but teens rank family dinners pretty high on their list of things to do. In fact, 80% of teenagers say that family dinner is the time of the day they're most likely to talk to their parents. And what we know is that family dinners are associated with lower rates of depression, lower rates of anxiety, substance abuse, eating disorders, and tobacco use, and early teen pregnancies, and a higher rate of resilience and self-esteem. Holy cow, here's one
Yeah.
routine that we could easily build in, not every night, but maybe more times than not, that had these kinds of, give back. This is a return on an investment just for one routine around dinner. Incredible.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And so everyone's so busy and kids are all over the place and kids have, everyone's schedule's full. But those nights when you can do it, to do it around the table, don't do it in
Yeah.
front of the TV, and sit there and talk. And so if the conversation is very simply, hey, highs and lows, everybody go around the table, best part of your day, worst part of your day, best part of your week, worst part of your week.
Yeah.
Or I love go in some store, go and get a thing of conversation starters, and you just have those
Yes.
cards at the dinner table, and
Right.
then everybody pulls one out and everybody answers it, and you just go around, and sometimes they're silly, but sometimes they're more in depth. And
Yeah.
that's because it's sometimes everyone gets worried about like, what are we going to talk about? Those conversation starter cards are perfect for that because you don't have to come up with everything.
Right.
And then you, as the parent, also has to answer those. That's an easy trick. And then when you run through the whole pack, you buy a new one.
Yeah. I love this right here because you're saying, hey, there are tools out there, or just highs and lows, good and bad. Giving someone just communication starters. All we got to do is get it started. Once we get it started, we think our kids are going to be quiet. They might be on the first couple of rounds, but after they get going, they start to talk. And sometimes we don't even have any room ourselves.
Yes.
We don't have much room to kind of fill those conversations around. You also, in your articles that you write, you talk about talking about what defines us as a family. What are our family values that identify us, that bond us, that create an attachment, that we can kind of circle our wagons around, that these are the things that are important to our family. Talk about the importance of family values and the discussion of those as a family system.
So when you're talking about the more difficult topics like mental health or anxiety or depression, it's then you get to talk through what your point of view is on those things, or like for you as a kid, what it was like growing up. And so you don't have to say things like, well, we as a family believe the following. You just get to say, okay, here's how I come at those sort of things. Here's how I think about those things. Here's how I think about the current political climate. Here's how I think about like what's been going on and with, mass shootings, stuff like that. And so because you're having those more difficult conversations about the heavier topics, you're instilling in your child what those family values are. They're going to pick it up. They're going to know. Also, they get to disagree. They get to have alternative points of view, and they get to say things from their point of view that you may be the exact opposite of. And that's okay, because then you get to ask really open-ended questions like, well, hold on, walk me through that. Like, how did you think about that? Or where did that come from? Or like, what are you seeing or reading that's influencing you that way? And so then you get to talk about like, okay, got it, I see where you're coming from, but have you thought about it this way? Or have you thought about that? Because then they're getting not only just how you think, but also like what you as a family perceive as right versus wrongs, or okay versus not okay, and any of that stuff. And it's that can only come out in the course of those more difficult topics.
Let me talk this segue just a little bit, taking what you're saying right here. If we can use our family values as kind of a foundational entree into talking about some of the critical conversations that you encourage parents to have with their teens, where the parent is taking an active and initiating kind of role, unless the kids bring it up, that's fine too. But if they can take that kind of role, if we come at some of the topics that you recommend we talk about, and maybe tell us a little bit about the importance of each one, things like mental health, suicide, drug abuse, self-harm, sex, sexuality, abuse, bullying. These are some of the topic areas that you say we should be talking about 512 times with our kids. But you're saying maybe we can enter into these, not saying, hey, suicide is bad, or drug use is wrong, or sexuality, you're saying if we can come at it with the shared underlying value of here's where I come at this from. It's not judging it. It's here's my value around it, and having that as an entree, and maybe asking the kids what their values around it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's just start with mental health. And so with any of these topics, by the way, it can be awkward to sort of like bring it up out of the blue. But as a parent, you should be the one bringing it up. If your kid does, great. But if not, that's your job. Use headlines, use recent news, use things that you've seen or like media you've been exposed to. So you can say like, hey, I was listening to this like idiot therapist in Arizona who's talking about teen mental health stuff. Like, hey, kiddo. And it's really also to bring it up and like, do any of your friends struggle with mental health stuff? Or do you know anybody that does? Because then you can bring up the topic and your kid doesn't have to talk about themselves. They can talk about the topic, and then you can bridge it to, hey, what's your anxiety get like? Or like, when do you feel really down? Or what are the times whenever you feel like so overwhelmed you don't know what to do? And you get to talk them through that. And then you also have to give your own stories there then too. That's also going to be like I know just how that feels. I get overwhelmed when, And you then talk through your own, because now you guys are in it together. That's that attachment piece where I'm sharing, hey, I'm not perfect either. I also struggle with these things. And when I was your age, here's how I struggled with those things. And so you can use topics or media to bring up mental health and to talk about that. It is such a huge topic for kids and teens. It's around a lot. They're consuming it on their social medias. It's kind of everywhere and very normalized. And so they'll have a sense. Even tweens know a lot about this and already have really big thoughts. So mental health, absolutely on that. Suicide, bring that topic up. I'm in Phoenix and in the East Valley, and it's been a brutal situation out here with teen suicide. It is, we are some of the highest in the nation. And it's all because of that perceived pressure that I talked about, where at the beginning of the school year, around this time of year, because we have finals coming up right now, and then toward the end of the school year, where we'll see a rash. It's 2, 3, 4 kids, like right in a row, right, one right after another, like from the same high school sometimes. And bring that, talk about that topic, talk about like, hey, you ever get there? You ever have those thoughts? You ever get that far? Do any of your friends ever do that? What do you do when one of your friends tells you that they're thinking about that? How do you handle it? And then, hey, kiddo, how do you know when to tell an adult about those things? Because ultimately it's I'm so worried about you, friend. How do I got to call in the troops because this is a little bit too much for me. Bring that up. Talk to them very specifically about it. You don't have to then give them a lecture about using the 988, helpline or something like that. You can just, let them know that, listen, I've been there. I know just what that's like. Anytime, kiddo, if you have to wake me up at 3 a.m, I'm good. Just you can always come to me. I'm never going to judge you, and we'll figure it out together. We'll always figure it out.
Yeah, but Michael, if I'm talking to my child and they're on the brink and I don't know it and I bring it up, that's going to tip them over the edge, isn't it?
They're already going over the edge. You just don't know it. They're driving their car over the edge of that cliff, so to speak. And if it's heading that way, it's heading that way. You're not going to your kid isn't then going to go, I wasn't thinking about suicide, but now that you brought it up, perhaps that's an option for me. No, absolutely not. And if it's in there, it's already in there. And if they're thinking that way, they want somebody to ask. They honestly do. They don't until after you get to that point where you've already decided that you're going to attempt. But anytime up before that, and even right up to that moment of attempt, lots of times they want somebody to ask, and because we'll see those statistics about afterwards about the amount of time kids regret and wish they hadn't attempted. And so if they survive, they're going to look back on it and go, I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I would have reached out. I wish I had used my support people around me as a resource versus keeping this all to myself and not letting anybody know.
Yeah. So this idea of kind of initiating, kind of nudging these conversations, I know you also encourage additional topics like drug use or sexuality, sex, abuse, bullying. Give us some lead-ins to these kinds of conversations as well. In addition to maybe using media as an entree, what are some other lead-ins that we can use?
Driving your kid to or from school, this easy one is like, hey, how many people did you see vaping in the bathroom today? How many people do you know that were smoking pot? How many people do you think in your classes are high at any given time? What do you think's behind that? What do you think's going on that way? What do you know about where they get it from? Like that kind of stuff. Just like hey, what's around? What's going on? Trying to get the vibe of overall their high school. If they're riding the bus, by the way, they're around all of this stuff. It is the buses is towards the back of the bus. So many people are vaping, blowing it out the window, either nicotine or marijuana. And you can just ask those questions hey, you don't have to tell me names or anything, but how much are you seeing that, kiddo? How much of that stuff is around? What's that like for you? And then when's the last time somebody offered it to you? Because somebody's offered it somewhere, somebody has said something, that kind of stuff is around. And then also there's lots of times, just as an aside, where when the marijuana is around, because it's just around a lot more these days, or even things like MDMA or acid or any the club drugs, so much is fentanyl laced. Just that idea that okay, kiddo, I get that you're smoking sometimes. I understand that comes up, or at parties, it's kind of around. You got to be safe. It's really important to be safe. Same thing around sex, where if you're aware that your kid is sexually active, whether what you think about that, you get to talk about your family values, about whether that stuff is okay or not okay. But it's also be safe. Whatever you're doing, be smart about it, be safe about it. And to make sure that they get why that's important to you, that you can accept that sometimes kids are going to do things, or to talk to their, hey, how many of your friends are sexually active? What's going on that way? Are they being safe? Do you know that they're being safe? Things like that are really good conversations to have too.
Yeah, Michael, I'm afraid that my child, let's say, is possibly being bullied or intimidated, maybe even abused, by their other peers. I don't know how to address that one. How do I bring that one up?
Hey, kiddo, I see a lot when you're coming home from school. You look really down. You look like you got defeated that day. You look like something happened. What's going on? Like, who's saying what? What's happening throughout the school day? Is it about grades? Is it about classes? Or is it about the other kids? And then listen. And maybe they want you to bring the toolbox. Maybe they want you to bring the Kleenex box. Like, maybe they want you to help solve it. Maybe they just want you to listen, because sometimes those things aren't that solvable. And telling a teacher doesn't always get effects, and it doesn't always make things better. And lots of times it can make it worse, because now the teacher is going to talk to the kid bullying them. They're going to know who talked to them, and now you're really going to pay. And so it's if they need some help, you can help teach them some like skills of assertiveness, what to say back, how to handle those situations, how to avoid it, how to deflect, any of that stuff if they need that. Or just let them vent and let them be there for it and talk about it. It sucks. And there's this kid that comes by every day and says something horrible to them. And you get to talk through, what's that like? Is there, how's that affect you? Is that affecting your self-esteem, what you believe about yourself? Things like that. And so if it's happening, you're going to notice that your kid is off. Easy doorway in. Just talk about what's bothering them.
So let's take it one step further. Let's say the bullying gets to be where it moves into a place of it becomes really detrimental to our child. And this is a time when all the techniques, really nicely stated, by the way, are good, but this is above their pay grade. And we need to kind of step in either with another parent or some school. How do you have that conversation with your child first about, hey, honey, this is one of those times when I think I'm going to need to step in with you. I got to be a sheepdog here because there's some wolves out there that are hurting my sheep, and I don't want that to happen. So I need to step in here. But Dad, if you do that, it's going to get worse. I know, honey, but how do I have that conversation with my child first, and then either the parent or the authority involved here?
Yeah. So in those situations when you're letting them know, like, sometimes as parents, what we have to do is, I got you, kiddo, but I have to protect you here, even though you really don't want me to. I know where this is going, and it's going to get worse. And I'm watching you slip further and further, and it's not going to get better by itself anymore. And so we've tried everything we know how to try. It's getting worse and it's getting worse. This is the time we have to call the school in. And so I'm going to go sit down and have a person-to-person meeting with your vice principal to let them know, or whoever the authority person is, to let them know what's going on. My commitment to you, kiddo, is going to be that they're not going to come talk to you about it. They're not going to go straight to that bully. We're going to come up with a plan where it's going to be obviously very discreet, but it will get addressed, and it's going to be on people's radar, because this has to stop. And if it doesn't stop even after this, I'm going to get really squeaky, and so things can get better. I love you too much not to protect you here, and I get that you don't want me to, but I can't keep watching you suffer.
Yeah, Michael, I love that piece. What you're conveying right there is maybe something and we need to be taught this, is best modeled, and you're modeling it really nicely with that conversation. We get to teach our children their self-value, because what's happening at school is it's being, eroded away and diminished. And you're basically saying you are of too much value, and you might get used to being, teased or taking the bullying, but I'm not going to allow it at a certain point, and you're too valuable. And what that does, I think, later on, is that allows, our kids to go into their future relationships with self-value and good esteem, good value, good self-worth, that allows them to determine good behavior and bad behavior, whether it's in their dating or their choices in friendships. So I really like this point right here that you're making.
Lots of times too, teens will come back with the whole like, oh, well, if you're going to go talk to the principal, then I'm not going to tell you anything anymore. Mm-hmm. If this is how you're going to handle it, you get to come back with things like, I know that we have a good relationship, and I understand that you're frustrated right now, and you know that I love you, and I know that you love me. So I know just this one thing isn't going to just straight break our relationship. And so I get what you're saying right now. I totally hear it. And kiddo, I know that we're going to have good talks again in the future.
Yeah, I know you're probably scared right now, but I'm going to ask you to trust me. Just trust me here.
Yeah, I got your back. It's okay. We'll handle this together.
I love that piece. Hey, let's shift just a wee bit in our time here today. One of the, the things where everybody's talking about right now and what everybody's glued to is our social media, our devices, et cetera. And We oftentimes, hear parents say, is it right for me to check up on them, and how much time online is okay? And should I be concerned about the things they're being exposed to that I may not know? What are some practical tips that you've got, Michael, that are just foundational things and conversations that parents get to have with their child around social media and their devices?
So talk to them about, like, what's the craziest message you've gotten from somebody you don't know? What's the craziest message one of your friends have gotten? How sexual do those things get sometimes? What's the thing that you've seen online that you thought was scary or inappropriate or didn't make sense to you? Things like that. You can also look at, parents do need to be in and check in on their kids' social media. It's important. Even for like very mature kids, lots of times there's stuff that is just beyond what their young brains can handle. And so
how do you tell them that? Yeah, honey, I love you enough to be involved, and I love you enough to be in there. How do you convey that?
Just like that, where and even if you have a teenager and you haven't been checking all this time, you can say, like, listen, I'm learning about how rough things can get. I didn't realize how bad it could be, but I do now. And so I just want to make sure that things are safe. I want to make sure that things are okay. And when you get in there and you see their DMs back and forth, and you see their messages, and teenagers are teenagers, so they're going to say wildly inappropriate stuff, and they're going to have language that you think is so vulgar you don't know what to do with yourself. You don't address that stuff. They get to do that. As teenagers, we said terrible things when our parents weren't around. They just didn't hear it. Well, if you're reading their messages, that's the modern version of that. Yeah. They get to say those things. They get to call each other names because they're friends, and they get to use the F word as much as they want to, as long as it's not around adults and as long as they're not being disrespectful. Yeah. And so you're not going to dig into that stuff or correct them on those things. But when you see dangerous stuff, when there's people trying to manipulate them or people trying to say or do things that are not okay, that's what you're in there for. And that's what.
Yeah, but you don't trust me then. See, yeah, but you don't trust me, Dad. And this is my private, this is my privacy.
It's not a democracy. This is a parentocracy. And in the same way that,
there you go.
I do trust you. I trust you so much to have it to begin with, but also some of the stuff is big and hard. And there are people out there who are amazing at manipulation, and they could even potentially manipulate me, but they're not even going to try because I'm an adult. And so I just know what to look for. I know what to have a heads up for. And it may not even be on your radar for any of that stuff. And so it's not that I don't trust you. You get to do as much or as little as you want to on those things. I just have to make sure you're safe. That's my job.
Really good. Really good. You say some other things about, friend your kids online, and you talk about linking to their accounts, keeping the lines of communication going. And that's just your mantra through all of this stuff. And monitor your child's history. Take a look at their web browsers and see what's going on. And like you said, too, make sure you're seeing what is, who's contacting them, and what are people saying to them. There's a lot of wolves out there, a lot of people in sheep's clothing that are trying to hurt our young people and using this platform as a way to manipulate and selfishly get their own needs met. And you say that it's a lot of effort, sometimes a daunting task, but the gain is worth the effort if we can put it in there. I would agree with that. Hey, as we're kind of coming now to the end of our time here today, give us a story that stands out to you about some of these conversations that we're having today and some of the ways that you're seeding ideas to promote and encourage this kind of just gritty conversation with our kids. What stands out from maybe a time in your practice of a family doing some good work around this?
This is an easy one. There was a 15-year-old boy, young man, and he was acting up all over the place. Like, he was getting in more and more trouble, and he was also actually starting to self-harm. And the more questions I asked, the more things that I looked at, it very clearly was he didn't have a reasonable relationship with his parents. He really didn't. And so that was his behavior, was communicating, I need you, and I need you to pay attention to me. And so my work with that family was 90% with the parents, where I coached them through about date your kids, about have that intentional daily time, spend the time with them, no matter what it is. I coached them up on how to bring up some of these harder conversations, about how to talk to him about his mental health. And it absolutely positively completely extinguished the behaviors.
So
I did very, very minimal like coping skills or any strategies with the kid of some stuff about how to get through a moment, like basically like breathing techniques. That
yeah.
was it. It was all from the parents being there for that kid and him being able to trust that relationship. So instead of being in his room ruminating and then therefore self-harming, whenever his stuff would start to get dark, he'd walk out of the room and sit down with his mom and know that if he wanted to talk, he could. If not, he could just be right there. But he wasn't going to cut, and he was going to make it through that moment because he now knew that she was going to be there for him. It took almost no time and completely changed their lives.
Yeah, you're going back to this theme of kind of as clinicians, we talk about, the attachment and ruptured attachments or, non-available attachment. We talked with a guy in a recent podcast who talked about these attachments ideas being thwarted belonging. And I just love that phrase. We need to belong, and we need to know that we can go to. And when that's thwarted, then you say, well, all behavior is communication. And like you said earlier, and this behavior is just the teen's best way to communicate. But if we can give them a different way to do it by coaching the parents up and tooling them up, man, what changes we can see actually occur.
Yeah, absolutely. If they're going to tell you something, whether like you said, they're verbally going to tell it or they're behaviorally going to tell it to you.
Yeah,
and if you can give that doorway in where they can tell it to you verbally, they don't need to communicate the other ways.
Right. That's so good. That's so good. Hey, well, Michael, as we're winding down today, I'd love for folks to have access to you, to some resources around teen and adolescent mental health, Evolve Counseling, your work. Give us some resources, would you?
Absolutely. So the website is evolvecounselingaz.com. And my social media is Facebook and TikTok and Instagram, and all of those is Michael Klinkner Counseling.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I love the encouraging, gritty, courageous message that you're leaving with parents. Parenting is not an easy task, but it is a phenomenal role that we get to step into. And also not even with parenting, just those that are engaged with our youth for today. It's a privileged role, and it's a role that they need us to be in to help shepherd and guide and be curious and interested about. And it's a good conversation. I sure appreciate it, Michael.
Thank you so much.
Great to have you back with us. I also want to thank you, our listeners, for joining Michael and me today. It's always great to have you. I want to remind you that today's episode and its resources, as well as all of our other podcasts, can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. So check out our webpage, triadhq.com/BHT, and explore our archive of podcasts and resource materials. Thanks again for being with us on the show, and we'll look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.